Perfecto, estamos al aire. Bueno, bienvenidos a la segunda sesión de charlas de práctica. Les recuerdo que hace 2 semanas estuvimos conversando con Esther Carró, arquitecta brasileña basada en Sao Paulo, con su práctica de arquitectura y activismo en favelas en Sao Paulo. Y hoy vamos a conversar y vamos a ver la forma en que trabajan dos arquitectas de dos lugares diferentes. Farah Alkhoury y Lucia Rebolino, que nos van a conversar acerca, nos van a mostrar, y vamos a tener una conversación en inglés y en español sobre lo que están trabajando. Eh, Solamente mencionar que Farah Alkhoury es arquitecta iraquí, basada en Estados Unidos, en Nueva York, y Lucia Rebolino es arquitecta italiana, basada en este minuto en Londres, Inglaterra. Voy a hacer una pequeña presentación también para que sepan, para que las conozcan. Y después vamos a dar el pase para que puedan comenzar. Vamos a cambiar de ahí, va a hacer switch a inglés, pero bueno. Lucía Rebolino es arquitecta y diseñadora computacional con enfoque en investigación. Actualmente trabaja como investigadora en Forensic Architecture en Londres y como profesora asociada de GISAP, Columbia GISAP, en la Universidad de Columbia en Nueva York. Concibe su práctica como un espacio donde diversas ramas de la ciencia y el diseño pueden conceptualizar, criticar, visualizar y provocar nuevas estéticas de contracartografías o cartografías críticas. Lucía también ha trabajado en el Center for Spatial Research en Nueva York, explorando proyectos investigativos a través de la visualización de datos. Ha impartido conferencias en varias escuelas de diseño, de arquitectura, incluidas la Universidad Tecnológica de Delft, la Architectural Association, y la Universidad de Columbia y el Politécnico de Milán y de Turín, en Italia. Tiene un máster en arquitectura por el Politécnico de Turín, o sea, graduada de pregrado por el Politécnico de Turín, y un Master of Science en prácticas de diseño computacional de la Universidad de Columbia, donde recibió un premio por el uso innovador de los medios computacionales en la investigación del diseño. Por otro lado, para Al-Khoury, es arquitecta iraquí e investigadora basada en Nueva York y actualmente es Architecture Fellow, investigadora asociada de Bard College en Nueva York. Graduada también con un Master of Science en la Universidad de Columbia. Eh, Farah, Lucia, hi, how are you? Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. I just did a quick introduction to your profiles, a translated profiles, of course. Maybe some mistakes involved, but doesn't matter, I think. Um, I I don't know who wants to start, or you have
Can I,
any.
Leon,
Hmm?
can I interrupt
Oh, yes,
to
yes. Sorry.
explain a little bit to the students first, to try to introduce to like the subjects or the topics that Farah and Lucia are going to talk
Of course.
about. I'm going to say it in Spanish first, and then Lucia and Farah can translate it for you. Bien, las dos invitadas de hoy no trabajan juntas, pero sí creo que hay varios puntos en común en las prácticas de las dos. Las dos son investigadoras. En las prácticas de ambas hay un interés, ¿cierto?, en la investigación como un medio para entender y describir la realidad y responder a problemas sociales, ambientales y políticos en los que incide nuestra disciplina. En esta línea creo que podríamos decir que las dos entienden la arquitectura como una herramienta crítica para comprender el mundo y que ambas usan herramientas de arquitectura, o valga la redundancia, para explicar cómo la materialidad o cómo el mundo físico puede impactar o afectar las relaciones sociales. Creo que ambas prácticas plantean preguntas con una relevancia política y usan la arquitectura ya sea para responder de manera bastante operativa, como mediante la reconstrucción de eventos y escenarios específicos, o bien entendiendo la arquitectura como un agente que puede habilitar también o potenciar situaciones de conflicto. So first of all, thank you very much, Lucia and Farah, for taking the time to be here with us today. I was just briefly explaining to our students the subjects around both of your practices, which I think we think have a lot in common. you can, of course, elaborate on this later on, but I think both of you see architecture as a critical tool for understanding the world right now. You both use architectural tools to describe the world, describe social and political events and social relations, to explain how physicality can impact or affect those social relations, right? So both of your practices ask questions that have political significance and use architecture either to answer them in a very operative way, but also in a way of viewing architecture as an agent that can enable situations of conflict. I'm sure you can express this a lot better than I can, so I'll let you start. We can let you both do your presentations, and then after that, we can open up the conversation to the students. I don't know which one of you want to start.
Um, any
Yeah,
preference
you can start,
on
Farah.
You can
just
start.
yeah, would you prefer to start? I don't mind.
No. It's absolutely fine. You can go first. I can leave you the first spot.
Okay. All right. I'll share my screen. Just sure. Okay. Do you see? Just making sure that you see my screen.
Yes, we
Yes,
see it.
I can see it.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. First, thank you so much, Leon and Francesca, for inviting me to join the UNAB Professional Practice Talk. And thank you so much for your emphasis on, like, not having language limit us. And it is, I really appreciate the way in which you insist on showing different positionality through these talks. And I think this is important for us to begin to actually make our own positions. I just briefly, again, I'm an Iraqi architect and researcher. Currently, I'm an architecture fellow at Bard College in New York. My work examines environmental violence and political entanglements as consequential to architecture and spatial thinking. I titled this talk Architecture as Witness, witness to political, environmental, and societal entanglements. I will expand on what that means by presenting two design research projects, which will discuss research as exhibition and research as planetary practice. In preparing this talk, I had to ask myself what constitutes as a professional practice in architecture, because I often find it difficult to call myself an architect or place my work within the context of traditional professional architecture practice. This comes from the desire to think about architecture beyond the building and how architecture is deeply entangled in issues of inclusion, exclusion, violence, intentions, and politics. When I graduated from architecture school in Sharjah about 9 years ago, we started a sort of coalition with my partner Tigran Kostantian and classmate Khalid Tamimi called Bites of Architecture, to discuss and interrogate architecture history and theory through biweekly events. At the time, we were not sure what politics had to do with architecture, but this non-institutionalized way of practicing architecture allowed us to question the systems of capitalism and the colonial hegemonies we were entangled with. Although we discontinued this platform, in many ways it allows us a certain understanding of architecture as research, specifically through a non-institutionalized coalition. I position my work as design research to allow for a particular mode of architecture thinking that confronts the ways in which occupation and imperialism function as coordinated and often invisible forms of ongoing spatial violence that render multiple landscapes uninhabitable and futures negated. Our contemporary world is deeply saturated and altered by militarization and its dependency on resource extraction and exploitation of indigenous land. My research is particularly focused on this because the environment and its degradation are products of design, a degradation that is unequally distributed and particularly evident in ecosystems rendered empty and expendable due to imperialism, contingency operations, and the so-called war on terror campaigns. As architecture historian Samia Henny argues, architecture is not only what is designed and built, but also what is indebted, destroyed, dismantled, contaminated, displaced, buried on earth, and wasted. And of course, this is now extremely evident today through the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. This is an Iraqi magazine called Ahl al-Naft, in Arabic, which translates to the people of oil. Ahl al-Naft was published monthly in Beirut from 1951 to 1959 by the British-run Iraq Petroleum Company. I bring this up because it is this particular mode in which technique of colonialism blurred the boundaries between the body and the site of occupation by designating the body itself as a site of extraction. This form of violence is unrecognized as act of war, those found in everyday experiences, material consequences, and the effective residence of slow violence, as defined by Rob Nixon, and that penetrates and contaminates environments and ecologies. The first project I'll go through is to expand on the idea of research as exhibition. Kolobeni Yard's Titanium and the Planetary Making of Shine and Dust is a research-based installation presented at the 18th Venice Architecture Biennale. This was a collective work by a network of activists from Kolobeni in South Africa, led by Andreas Hake and the Office of Political Innovation, for which I was part of as a researcher. This work connects the extreme shine of Hudson Yards in New York City to the extraction of titanium in Kolobeni, South Africa, where indigenous communities have long resisted mining operation threatening their land and ocean. Hudson Yards stands as a monument to the violence of capitalism's accumulation. Beneath its glossy surfaces lies a complex web of exploitations. First, through Hudson Yards' financial gerrymandering, developers manipulated the EP5 visa program in New York City, designated to stimulate investment in distressed areas, by redrawing economic boundaries in New York, connecting Hudson Yards to high unemployment neighborhoods in Harlem. This diverted $1.6 billion in public funds. This act stole resources from the very communities the program intended to support. Second, through architecture access, because Manhattan does not have empty sites to allow for large-scale developments like Hudson Yards. It sits on on top of a platform over the rail yards. The heat from the train tracks below emit over 150 degrees Fahrenheit. A soil sandwich with glycol coolant pipes cool the platform, while 15 40-feet-long jet engine-sized fans ventilate the space. These massive fans, made with titanium alloys, combine high structural resistance with the capacity to act as heat barriers. Third, through the self-cleaning facade. In 2001, the multinational glass corporation Pilkington developed the first self-cleaning glass by incorporating titanium dioxide-based coatings. Pilkington Active became a permanently shining building cladding solution. Titanium dioxide has the capacity to photocatalyze dust in sunlight, breaking down dust particles and allowing rainwater to wash them away. As a result, titanium dioxide coatings help keep surfaces dust-free, contributing to the relentless shine of structures like Hudson Yards. 8,000 miles from New York in Kolobeni, the architecture of dissidence to shininess and resistance can be found. In 2002, Mineral Commodities Limited, an Australian company, identified vast titanium deposits in Kolobeni. They planned to mine 360 million tons of sand along a 22-kilometer stretch of coast, one of the largest undeveloped mineral sand resources in the world, containing the 10th largest deposit of ilmenite, the primary ore of titanium. The mining would have devastated 6 villages. The indigenous people of Mompondo land have a strong anti-mining stance through their understanding of being custodians of the land. Heavy minerals like titanium are integral to soil stability and health. Removing them disrupts the ecosystem irreparably. Sinagugu Sigulu, a community leader, notes that once these minerals are extracted, you have destroyed the ecosystem. If mined, the dustiness left behind would have contrasted starkly with the shininess of places like Hudson Yards. Do you hear the sound? Yeah. Through the architecture of the Komkulo, which means the power of the land, a place for decision-making, the Amadiba Crisis Committee practices forms of resistance and true democracy. They compose and sing songs against mining as a form of protest and archiving of stories. The installation relied heavily on sound as a tool for spatial representation, with the sound direction of José Luis Espago. Sound was not only critical because of the testimonies of Kolobeni activists, but also sound was important to understand architecture as a witness. From the sound of the titanium jet engines beneath Hudson Yard, in contrast to the sound of the protest songs sang by Kolobeni communities, and the sounds of the red dunes where titanium oxide is present, to the sounds and vibrations of the ocean blast that have been central to the Kolobeni struggle. The second project I would like to share is the one I'm currently working on right now for my fellowship. And I'm sharing this to emphasize the idea of research as a planetary practice. Occupied ecologies, the architecture of toxic proliferation, the project I'm currently working on during my fellowship at BART. This research attends to the presence of military toxicity that remains embedded in the soil, water, and air long after wars are declared to be over. It traces depleted uranium's planetary infrastructural, spatial, and material presence across 3 interconnected ecologies: Iraq, Puerto Rico, and the United States. The project seeks to understand the persistence of the ongoing climate crisis and how the repercussions of historical environmental violence are being felt today within these territories. The term occupied ecologies refers to the toxic legacy of US imperialism and resource extraction that for centuries has subjugated human and non-human bodies by controlling their engagement with the environment at multiple scales through the planetary reach of the United States military's infrastructural presence. In 2001, the Defense Department hearing, a group of white men convened to testify on the Navy's decision to cease military exercises on the Puerto Rican island of Vieques after 6 decades of occupation. During this hearing, US Navy officials frequently referenced Iraq in their testimonies. They spoke about how training exercises in Vieques had prepared carrier battle groups and pilots for combat missions over Iraq. This particularly shows the direct connection between the ecological degradation of one territory and the military action in another. The chief of naval operation was questioned about what the Navy required in a new training site to replace Vieques. His response emphasized the need for excessive air and sea space to replicate the complex environments of the Arabian Gulf, where airspace is heavily congested with aircraft and live ordnance is deployed. He dismissed locations like New Mexico, stating that lacking oceanic features. This showing how certain geographies are rendered dispensable because of their specific ecological characteristic necessary for military training and operations. This hearing shows that the unique ecology of Vieques was instrumentalized as a testing ground that facilitated military interventions elsewhere, such as Iraq. The closure of Vieques as a military site coincided with the escalation of the 2003 invasion of Iraq, marking a shift in the geographical focus of U.S. military operations while leaving behind a legacy of environmental contamination in Vieques. The infrastructure of military toxicity goes beyond the immediate site of occupation. It forms a complex network of logistics and flows, and its environmental degradation transcends the borders of war zones. One of the materials tested in Vieques and deployed in Iraq was depleted uranium, a nuclear waste byproduct. Due to the material's high density and incendiary effect, it has been used for ammunition and became the weapon of choice for military occupation around the world, such as Bosnia, Syria, and others subjected to imperial interventions. Western narratives around the Gulf War circulated imagery that misread Iraq as an empty landscape that can be violated. These mediated images of war and its weaponry systems were central to the social and cultural consumption of military power in the United States. On the other hand, depleted uranium is a ghostly and invisible residue of war, which remains little known and often deliberately obscured from view. 25% of the contaminated sites are in major Iraqi towns and cities where adverse effects on human health are evident. The United States Department of Defense became interested in using the metal depleted uranium in weapons because it was 2.5 times heavier than steel and 1.5 times heavier than lead. Natural occurring uranium is made up out of two isotopes, uranium-238 and 235. The variation in the concentration of the fissile uranium-235 determines whether it is to be used as nuclear fuel or for military weapons. The toxic chemical was used to manufacture bullets, mortar shells, armor for tanks, and weights to balance aircrafts. When it comes into contact with its target, DU explodes at a high temperature, about 700 degrees Celsius, disintegrates and diffuses into minute particles in the air, soil, and water, and is consequently inhaled or ingested, carrying alpha radiations into bodies and ecosystems. While in Vieques, toxic waste sites are now officially a wildlife refuge. The 900-acre live impact area is officially designated as a wildlife preserve and blocked from public access, overshadowed by extensive 4,000-page cleanup documents from agencies like the United States Government of Accountability, Naval Facilities Engineering System Command, and other bureaucratic agencies. Ironically, the island is simultaneously a federal wildlife refuge, a Superfund site, and a newly built luxury gated home. The site stands today as a touristic paradise of toxic contamination, and as the assemblage of subsoil and underwater technology make up the architecture of remediation across the site, the theater of complicity remains invisible. And when we look at how toxic warfare material waste, such as depleted uranium, is stored and chemically altered in the United States, The toxic metal is converted into a more stable chemical form, depleted uranium hexafluoride, and stored in 12-foot steel cylinders. These cylinders are buried underground and over time undergo erosions and leakages. A relic of the Cold War, the gaseous plant in Postmount, Ohio, currently undergoing decontamination and decommissioning. As the site transitions away from its historic role in the nation's nuclear weaponry, its legacy of contamination and the ongoing cleanup operation make clear that the diffusion and proliferation of environmental toxicity are never eradicated, but merely transformed and relocated. This spatial and environmental narrative forces a reconsideration of our relationship with industrial legacies and the politics of environmental restoration. These three sites show that the United States borders extend beyond land and water limits. Coinciding with its global military infrastructural presence, understanding the configuration of this infrastructure is crucial for comprehending US imperialism and colonialism in the 21st century. This is particularly important today, as we see, of course, in the context of the ongoing genocide inflicted by the Zionist regime against the Palestinian people in Gaza, where thousands of lives have been lost, losses that are entangled with environmental degradation, and where toxic proliferation are felt across Palestine and Lebanon. In the arena of institutionalized environmental diplomacy or theater of non-complicity, the production of evidence linking toxic warfare to adverse effects on human bodies is either silenced, denied, and even criminalized. This extends to remediation reports and the United States post-conflict environmental assessments. The post-conflict aesthetic gives the term ecocide a new meaning, in which environmental diplomacy becomes more about the collection of Western modes of evidence rather than the lived experiences, memories, and voices of communities where the proliferation of military toxicity is felt. I share this project, still work in progress, to elaborate that the research objective here is to develop methodologies in which architecture and activism can work together. Beyond its effects on bodies, I seek to understand the different ways in which toxicity is felt environmentally and spatially, and the radius at which the chemicals proliferate. To understand war beyond sites as targets and ruins, recognizing how architecture becomes a witness to environmental degradation and toxic proliferation. This understanding is integral to exploring existing modes of environmental stewardship through architecture and activism. I want to end with a few notes on the use of drawing as a tool for research, for which Leon and I have worked extensively together on. We draw because we are doing research, so we use drawing as a tool to expand our research. And most of the time, the data that we are confronted with are colonial and imperial documents. I find it important to redraw and redefine colonial cartographies in order to confront them. To attempt to interrogate the relationship between architecture, representation, technologies, and subjectivity of control by framing the architecture of occupation through drawing, we can begin to communicate environmental violence. Drawing becomes a form of activism, acknowledging the importance of perspectives, who is enacting the violence and who is rendered dispensable. It allows us to challenge dominant narratives, remaining in solidarity with practices that resist colonial and imperial hegemonies. Thank you. I'll end here.
Thank you very much, Farah. It was quite impressive, all your ongoing work. I haven't heard from that. So it sounds very interesting. I would like to know more later. I'm gonna call you. um, Francisca?
Yeah, so maybe we can try to like translate in some way everything that Farah said. I think it's a bit difficult, but I can start and maybe you can help me with the project. A ver, bueno, la presentación de Farah se llama Architecture as a Witness, que significa la arquitectura como testigo, ¿cierto? Ella trata temas de violencia ambiental, estatal, militar y corporativa como una consecuencia formal de la arquitectura y el pensamiento espacial. Creo que me parece importante que mencionó al principio que ella ve difícil llamarse, que al principio de su práctica veía difícil llamarse a sí misma como arquitecta. Creo que eso también es un punto importante para la serie de charlas, donde tratamos de entender la arquitectura más allá quizás de la práctica tradicional, más allá de la construcción que ella misma lo mencionaba, que le interesa abordar aquellos temas con los que se enreda la arquitectura como temas políticos y sociales, y entender la arquitectura por medio de eventos especiales, perdón, eventos sociales en específico, para entender cómo la arquitectura puede ser, no solo puede ser, como la arquitectura es política. Farah trata en sus investigaciones temas de ocupación, imperialismo y de violencia espacial, como ya dije, a través de la infraestructura, a través de entender la infraestructura militar y la explotación de distintas tierras indígenas. Entonces, sus proyectos creo que giran un poco en torno a eso, ¿cierto? A la explotación de distintos territorios en zonas de guerra y zonas también de explotación de minería. Eh, y como estas operaciones también son un producto del diseño, estas son operaciones diseñadas, ¿cierto? En ese sentido, la arquitectura no es solo lo que es construido, sino también lo que es, citándola a ella, lo que es desmantelado, explotado, desaprovechado y desechado, etcétera. Y en ese sentido nos presentó distintos proyectos. El primero, Research as Exhibition, investigación como exposición, en colaboración con Andrés Jaque, ¿cierto? Quizás León puede complementar más de los proyectos. Después está Research as Planetary Practice, investigación como una práctica planetaria. En ambos casos se habla como de la degradación ecológica de distintos territorios, como ya dije, en zonas de guerra, en el segundo caso en Irak, y la ocupación de Estados Unidos en Irak, donde el paisaje es interpretado, ¿cierto?, como estos paisajes vacíos que pueden ser explotados y convertidos en sitios de desechos tóxicos y cómo afecta eso como a la gente que vive ahí, obviamente. También mencionó, pues estoy punteando varias cosas, yo creo que León puede complementar un poco, pero mencionó algo importante que es entender la arquitectura, cómo la arquitectura y el activismo pueden funcionar o trabajar en conjunto, y ahí un poco hace referencia al nombre de su presentación, Architecture's Witness, para entender que la arquitectura como un poder, como, o sea, entender la arquitectura como en su rol más activo y no solo como ver las ruinas que quedan detrás de estos escenarios de conflicto. Y el último proyecto, que era Research is Drawing, habla un poco de eso, supongo, de usar el dibujo como herramienta para expandir y desarrollar la investigación, y para usar el dibujo también como una forma de activismo y para desafiar las narrativas dominantes. León.
Sí, sí, súper. Creo que lo explicaste increíblemente bien. Tengo
Yo
un
creo que
talento
explica un
para...
poco quizás los proyectos, si es que puedes, como que eso es
Sí,
más difícil, quizás
eh,
como tomar apunte de eso y traducir.
sí, sí, sí,
Tú que la
perfecto.
conoces más, digo, si no, preguntarle también directamente a ella.
También. Yeah, I'm gonna, Farah, we're just kind of translating like doing a very, very, very wrap up of all you're talking. I believe Francisca already said pretty much your whole presentation in a couple of minutes, but I'm just gonna add some key points, like some uh, some ideas, some freestyle ideas, like my interpretations also. And also I might ask you something, but Francis Espino, Francis, ¿quieres hacer una pregunta?
Hola, no, solo quería comentar que, well, I just wanted to say thank you to Farah for all the opportunity to show off this size of discipline. I think is super important because most of the time as a student, we fail to understand the magnitude or the importance that our discipline can have in the world. I mean, maybe a few hours before this meeting, I wouldn't have imagine that through architecture, one could study a topic as profound and delicate those discussed recently. And I think it's uh, wonderful because it opens a new state of mind uh, where we can consider what has been done wrong from architectural or constructive point of view, and how we can, as future architects, inform ourselves and take care responsibly of these church. And I think this the presentation was blow my mind. And thank you.
Gracias,
Thank you.
Francis, por... Farah, sorry, I don't know if you want to answer.
No, I was just saying thank you. I'm sure. I mean, I'm eager to hear Lucia's talk as well. And you said you wanted to translate it, or
Yeah, I'm gonna do some small comments, but just to like complete a little bit but I think anyways later we can keep like doing kind of a weird translation. But also Andrés is with the hand raised.
Yes, quiero intentar hacerle la pregunta a Farah en inglés, espero me entienda. And hi Farah, I would like to know in your words which aspects you think of architecture function as a tool for political protest or critique, and why it will be a useful tool for doing that.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think it would be better for the conversation if Lucia also gets to do her presentation first, and then maybe Andres, you can ask your question again, and then so
Okay.
we can have them both answering. I think that would be a bit more interesting.
Okay.
Farah, I'm gonna just finish this in Spanish very shortly because as Francisca said, I believe like this conversation will be complete with the Lucia take, and then I think we can have a weird in translation conversation. Sí, solamente quería agradecerles a quienes están haciendo el esfuerzo por seguir la conversación, también por hacer el esfuerzo. Me impresionó, nos espera Francis, Andrés y cualquier persona más que se quiera atrever, nosotros también podemos ayudar a participar, así que buenísimo, les agradezco un montón, creo que me pone muy contento al menos a mí como coordinador. Solamente quería complementar un poco lo que dijo Francisca en el sentido de lo que conozco a Farah y lo que Farah nos contó. Ella le asigna un rol muy importante en la metodología de trabajo e investigación, en las tecnologías y en el dibujo, y el dibujo especialmente como una herramienta, como la herramienta que tenemos nosotros los arquitectos para poder dar cuenta de las situaciones que están ocurriendo y cómo se van interrelacionando. Y en ese caso también dar voz o entregar los puntos de vista o también construir las realidades que muchas veces no están expuestas o visibles. Y en este caso, las distintas investigaciones que nos muestra Farah son de las interrelaciones, bueno, relaciones que existen entre distintos eventos y lugares y cuerpos que muchas veces no son visibles o no son tangibles tampoco. Entonces, por ejemplo, yo puedo hablar un poco más de la investigación que una de las investigaciones, que era una imagen que se leía el borde del Mediterráneo, eh, en donde la pregunta inicial de la investigación iba hacia cuál es el borde de Europa. Entonces la investigación empezó a construir qué es el borde de Europa, dónde se sitúa esa línea, o si es una línea, es un borde, o cuán espeso es ese borde. Entonces, a través de las a distintas herramientas, o sea, a través de la investigación, pero después de la tecnología asociada a la representación, lo puedo contar así como yo también participo, porque de hecho me tocó participar con Farah y con Jerry, otro amigo. Eh, es- la investigación fue cómo se construían o cómo se constituían las relaciones de poder que hacían que podían visibilizar una idea de frontera, que al final no era una línea que ocurría en Europa, sino que era una línea que empezaba a ocurrir en otros lugares. Y eso es por las interrelaciones y las implicancias. De alguna manera la investigación o los trabajos que después hizo con Andrés Jaque en la Bienal, en la última Bienal de Venecia, también tiene que ver un poco con esas relaciones que existen a distancia con territorios que están siendo sujetos de extracción y que están siendo utilizados un poco para que ocurran otros fenómenos asociados al desarrollo y un desarrollo en este caso asociado a sistemas de capitalismo extractivo. Con otro concepto que me pareció interesante, que lo pueden revisar, que se llama slow violence o violencia lenta, que es un concepto de una violencia sostenida y lenta, que lo desarrolla no estoy seguro si es arquitecto o no, pero se llama Rob Nixon, perdón, que lo pueden revisar, Rob Nixon. Eh, en general, esta forma o metodología mezcla la investigación con el activismo, en el sentido de entregar voces a sujetos o comunidades no hegemónicas. Eh, eh, claro, investigación, activismo y en este caso técnicas o tecnologías de la representación. Yo creo que podemos avanzar un poco con Lucía, porque van a ver que si bien son investigaciones diferentes, hay muchas cosas que son similares, al menos en puntos de vista o asociaciones, para que después tengamos una conversación. Lucia, hi. Yeah, sorry, I was just
Hi.
like, I believe you might understand a little bit what I just said, but maybe I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm testing my Spanish.
Yeah. Italian, Spanish, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just like a kind of giving uh, another short approach to what Farah told us, explaining some intentions, I believe, like from my understanding of what Farah was doing or pursuing through different projects and the relationship or the importance of the different tools or the methodology utilized for that, like this triad, like this idea of the use of the role of technology, the technology of representation, the idea of activism, and with what kind of activism, or activism of about what or whom, and in this case, research or architectural research, like how these things got entangled to documentate or relevate some issues or events or some relationships that are not uh, completely unfolded or visible. So, yeah, I don't know if I said something really current, but then it doesn't matter. Lucia, please. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Leon, and thank you both for inviting me and also Farah. Like your presentation was extremely interesting, and I found like very like clear point of connections of what I'm about to present. And so every like all the thing like all this like lecture that you set up, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, for like also students to understand both practices together. So I will start sharing my screen. Let me set up just these two things together. I also prepare like a presentation that goes through like few concepts, starting a little bit with like giving a oops. Like giving also a little bit of like background about myself, but Leon already introduced me very well. I'm an architect, but currently most of like would say like a research-based computational designer. And I like to bring together in my practice different branches of like science and design to try to create a new space where these two different practices can intersect both conceptually and visually. So currently I'm working as a researcher at Forensic Architecture in London, where I focus mostly on environmental projects, exploring tools and methodologies in the fields of mapping, cartography, data, and web platforms. Previously, I was teaching associate in Master of Computational Design Practices at Columbia GZAP in New York, where I met Leon. And then I also work at the Center for Spatial Research at Columbia, where I was again testing a little bit of limits that exist between computational design, mostly data visualization in investigative project. So as I said in the beginning, so I have a background in architecture, which it's I follow like the most traditional path in the beginning, doing like in Italy, still like 5 years kind of in a row, you divide it 3+2, but like it's 5 years full in architecture that I think were extremely important for me because kind of allow me to perceive the world through space, perspective, and scales, which is something that resonates in our everyday life, in like every kind of practices you can touch or like encounter in different kind of scenarios. And because of that, I realized that I really like to use data as an extension of my thinking and fold the information that derive from the physical space and the research in a digital way. Like let's say like envisioning like the web as a sort of like archival platform where you can develop and pursue different kind of research and like collect information together. So I've been wondering how as architect and as also as a designer, we're always questioning about the future. And I think our practice allow us to also like pushing our own boundaries and redefine what we can do in the built environment with our own knowledge. So as a designer and following today, like the framing of today's lecture, I think we can question, and this is also something I've written about, but it's interesting because Farah mentioned it before, how we can extend our knowledge beyond like a kind of conventional academia. So how we can develop new research model in both the digital and the physical space, and what kind of new mediums or new media can we use to communicate with multiple audiences. So personally, to also kind of introduce a bit the way I've been working on, as I mentioned before, I've started to use and see the web as a platform to spread my own work, envisioning it in a sort of like architectural perspective. So try to unfolding the web through layers, exploring new projects and topics at the intersection of different computational practices. So I think this was, for instance, an example was just try to like querying and fetching information from Google Maps to try to understand what's kind of information layer new like contemporary cartography is hiding from us. So I think every project starting with like a more specific like research question and then unfolded in and the web as a platform to like spread the work and research. But I think today I've prepared like a few brief examples of recent works because I find it interesting that no matter the kind of the research topic, I often ended up linking science, design, art, and information design by testing new tools in investigative projects that explore data visualization and new counter cartography aesthetics. So starting from this first project, so I'm going here. So hopefully I'm gonna, oops. I want to put myself small. No, I'm big. We are both very big now. I want to be very small. Okay. Can you see my screen? See? Okay, that's good. The first example that I want to introduce today is this ongoing investigation that I'm conducting together with the team at Forensic Architecture, which is related to the environmental destruction in Gaza. But also, I think in line with today's lecture topic, I would like to focus more on sharing instead of the topic, which I think it's like unfortunately, but also I think it's like very clear to most of us what's happening right now. I want to try to focus a little bit more to some techniques and methods that we use in the office to investigate this kind of topic. So for those who are like a least less familiar, about what we do at Forensic Architecture is an independent research agency, which is based at Goldsmith University, and we use spatial media analysis to investigate state and corporate violence worldwide. So we employ various techniques, mostly for like starting from open source research, in investigation ranging from like war crimes, violation of human rights, police brutality, environmental, and racial violence. But what I think it's very interesting, it's mentioning how, let me try to open this, like most of our team is very multidisciplinary, so we're mostly architects, but also we have software developers, lawyers, filmmakers, artists, academics, journalists. So we're around 25 people in the office, and we often collaborate with the expert in history, science, anthropology, activists. But what's the kind of like common line that exists between all of us that we share this like architectural background that I think allow us to envision this kind of project especially. And I personally, with my background in architecture and later in like computational studies, I think I enjoy these technical challenges of working at the intersection of coding and mapping. So I think the main thing that I want to do in this presentation is like explore the role of space and visual investigation in producing and presenting spatial evidence, taking some of the terminology that architecture includes, not just referring of like the built environment, but also to a more expanded concept of what architecture is. So, and to do so, I think it's important to like I want to stick to the topic of this like investigation we're conducting in Gaza, mostly to like make clear how different concepts related to architectural practice can like shape in between different topics and argument of research. So I think one of the interesting aspects is like how the term architecture can expand. So if we think about architecture as something that is not static or motionless, but it's more dynamic and temporal, we can also see the built environment as constantly and often also unpredictably transforming and reacting because of forces that happens around. So I think by examining these kind of environments, we can reconstruct the process and the narratives of the transformation of itself. So in that sense, architecture acts as a spatial record of the forces that work around it. So I bring this image in this example because I think it's interesting, like imagine like leaves out, they can be an expansion of architecture. So this is an example of what happened in 2015. It was an investigation in the office conducted at the time, and leaves were used as evidence of environmental violence in Gaza. So leaves from plants along the Israel-Gaza border revealed like damage from possible herbicide drift carried the wind in Gaza through the border. So these plants somehow acted like sensors, and they were recording the effects of this environmental violence. So these again, the things connect with what Farah was mentioning about this like slow violence over time, like remain in the ground, and we can detect in like this continuously shaping of the environment and architecture itself. So what we have been doing in our recent work on environmental destruction in Gaza is like reading the land and the territory to understand that violence that is describing upon it. Another concept that I think is interesting is the one of using like evidentiary statics. So I think that reading the land in this way is, and in the way that I showed you before, like, and you can see also in images, like in the background of the presentation, we like did kind of fluid dynamic simulation of like how the pollutants move over time, of also, these are like more recent analysis, remote sensing analysis, where we map through satellite the destruction and the loss of agriculture in Gaza over the time of destruction. I think this is kind of like what we call aestheticization of evidence. So the land already contains evidence of violence itself, and the aestheticization is kind of the process of revealing this hidden evidence. So we often work with videos, for instance, captured by the public to understand these as the evidence, and using visual and spatial analysis to expand what is contained with the frame and reveal the evidence they hold. So, for example, the video that you see now on the right of my screen, they've been taken in 2020, where when farmers and activists in Gaza and has used videos documenting the Israel aerial spray of crop killing herbicides over the border. So these videos show that the wind carried the herbicide westward into Gaza's farmland, and there was also an urgent letter from that was calling to call the end of this practice at the time. Another concept, which I think again, for those more familiar with the work conducted at the office, and also for, I think, for those who enjoy in the practice of architecture, like experimenting with the software for 3D modeling software, which I think are one of those that are most commonly used between different situations, is the concept of operative models. So I think for us, the physical and the digital 3D model are not a representation of kind of future or fictional environments, but function as optical, analytical, and narrative devices. So these spatial models help us synthesize data and also understand how incidents unfolds. So, and then I'll just to go through, I think the last concept, interesting in the matter of this project that I want to introduce today is the one of the collective threat production. So if I want to make, if we have to think about what truth today is more fluid than ever. So it's the result of a kind of a constructive process that is shaped in the public sphere by the constant clash of divergent claims and disclosure. So in this way, what I think was important for us is understand how we can build this collective through like different scales, different institutions, different also collaboration with like information that are collected from ground, from satellite. This you can see like remote sensing analysis again, like that happened through the border. And for instance, farmers in Gaza reported the damage of the crops and herbicide spraying at the time. And by comparing satellite data, we have been able to detect the level of damage. So yeah, I think what was mostly important for me showing this project was try to understand how in the framework of a topic that it's so contemporary and like so important under different perspectives, we can still like use many tools that are inscribed in our like today practices as architects to investigate and unfold this space of violence, this space of disruption, and understand it through different lenses. So here on the left of the screen, I wanted just to briefly mention, like, in an operative way, which are the tools that we use for this kind of investigation. So we move through more like traditional, like software, like blenders, but used in this way where we, what we call photogrammetry. So it's the photogrammetry is like this technique of like using different footage taken from different angles and then aligning this picture together allow us to like envision the space in a 3D dimension and understanding how events happen through the point of vision of people who like recorded video or like reported footage on the ground. Understand from especially important from the perspective of people who have been part of this violence or these kind of events. And then there is like this second scale, which is a scale that happens from above, I would say, or far. But it's still like with the technology and tools that we have nowadays, we can use it to like read the territory and understand patterns of destruction or different layer of violence. So this is like some videos that show like tools that we use in the office, like ArcGIS or other more coding-based platform for mapping and cartography practice. So this was like the first project and example I want to show. Now I will go faster. I lost track of the time completely. I wanted to show you this second project, which is kind of a long-lasting personal research, which I've been I started actually when I was like a student at GISAP, as it was like my thesis project, and then it developed like through articles or through some like lectures. So it's my personal interest, I would say. It's still like fall in the framework of what I was saying in the beginning of like this kind of practices, which is versatile in between different kind of disciplines. So I think what I want to say about this practice is like how it's important how we, with the tools of architecture, we can question the uncertainty of today models, intended also as like models prediction. Like we use modeling as a practice of like predicted the future, and then especially in fields like in some specific fields of science, like the climate science. So if usually we use mapping and cartography, which often are like abstract and complex concepts to analyze data. We can also use them through a more critical perspective to understand what's the uncertainty of the data that we use nowadays to like predict futures. So this project is an investigation. It's called Unpredictable Atmosphere, and it's an investigation of like how somehow this like weather data that we collect through satellite can have both like interference on the ground. So this is like a level of uncertainties that somehow depends on on the intersection, in the interference between different technologies, but also it questioned what I was saying before, different models of prediction, especially after some events that happen, as probably most of you also heard recently with the Hurricane Milton a few days ago. Some of these climate events that are happening right now are like out of the ability of nowadays prediction models, in a way that, like, if we think about how nowadays, for instance, NASA and that it's trying to build like new AI foundation model to like build the ability to predict the weather in the future. At the same time, the climate is going at such a fast pace that like this means that like category 6 hurricanes are they might have to start to redesign a new scale of like intensity of this kind of event. So to me, it was interesting. Has been always interesting try to understand how the development of technology that is going at a specific pace doesn't go at the same pace of the evolution of climate and in a weather event and climate crisis we are right now. So I think going into deeply the research questions and topics of the project might take a bit of time. But what was interesting to me to show is like, again, some of the techniques that I've been using in this project, which are related to again, like some more recent studies in like computational design and computer science. For instance, in this like frame of image, what is happening is because NASA is claiming that like all data set that they provide us that we use to build these models of prediction are like open source and available, but at the same time they are like sorted and encrypted in such a complicated format that like they're impossible to detect for the public audience. This project wanted to like scrape all the images related to the different NASA datasets and then kind of to reflect the hectic space that this climate science itself in the way data are stored. And yeah, I think I might shift very rapidly to the last project I wanted to present today, which is, it's going back in time basically. This is like the project that I developed at the time with my colleague Federica when we did the master of architecture in Italy. And I think it was the very first time we tried to experiment with like computational tools in the methods of like landscape ecology, and tested the relationship that exists between instability and stability, between social and political process, ecological and architectural ones. So the idea of the project was try to create a new taxonomy. The project, sorry, was called Bordo Clima, New Calligraphies of Moving Borders. And the main focus was about how borders conceived as something that it should be static on the terrain and on the land. Instead, it's moving fast and with like different paces due to like ecological processes that are like not that have like completely different timelines that those who belongs to like human and activity. So it was again like a long process of like collecting data and like data visualization through different softwares. What we wanted to understand how different borders were related to each other and what we call like helix border. So for us, helix borders were like those emblematic figures of disturbance were both like human and non-human presence. So for instance, we detected like borders in the world where we have different forces superimposed to each other, especially. So you can imagine like seeing like a river where there was like a fences on like on a side of this border, which like these are two different system of like creating a barrier, but like they have completely different time scale and level of dynamic of their movements with time. And then we talk about also some other concept belonging to more of a theoretical structure, because I think another important aspect of this kind of research is like building on a kind of theoretical framework, which is solid, so that you can also try to kind of speculate visually on different topics. So this was like externality was a concept taken through Timothy Morton and the concept of hyperobjects, and then wanted to like understand how these hyperobjects, which are external figures that are not calculable and directly visible at the scale of human perception, and they're kind of global phenomena constructed by humans and non-humans that have an enormous impact on our planet. They can shape the world we live in. And then again, as I was mentioning also before, the concept of different scales, we started like mapping these like borders as fluid borders all around the world, creating like sort of like prototype. And then the lens like focus more on specific case study that at the time were like looking at the Balkans as an area where like multiple of like the vast majority of the borders are human borders, and geopolitical borders are also superimposed to natural elements. Most of the part are rivers, where also like there's also very strong the concept of migration, the Balkan routes. So we wanted to highlight through different simulation, which is another important aspect of the research we were doing at the time. I'm not sure this video are still working. It's okay. The idea was like try to experiment with like this simulation software. For instance, the movement of a river due to like a certain level of like runoff of water over topography over time, and then understanding again through data of like the number of migrants moving over the border during time, try to understand so how this border was moving spatially, both because of natural rules somehow, like and then also because of like the human aspect on the ground. So like how can human and non-human were like reshaping together this concept of the border. So I don't know for how long I'm speaking, since I'm speaking, but I think I want to finish the presentation here, mostly because I am afraid that otherwise I will go lost in the description of projects, and instead I think it would be interesting to hear some questions of like yeah, like have a conversation with all of you guys and understand if there are like something interesting that we could bring out from this intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia, very much. I think your work is very fascinating and complex. So I'll try to like explain it to the students very briefly in Spanish first, and then maybe Leon can start the conversation and maybe we can go back to the students' questions, okay? A ver, un poco para resumir a lo que se dedica Lucía, pues León ya lo explicó un poco al principio, pero ella también como que quiso hacer énfasis en eso, de que se dedica se dedicaba originalmente, quizás en sus primeros años de práctica, a cierto, otra carrera como más tradicional de la arquitectura, y luego empezó ya a meterse más en este tema de estudios computacionales, de mapeo, de diseño de información, por tratar de integrar distintas ramas de arquitectura y de diseño de información, de distintas disciplinas también por medio de la visualización de datos. Eh, Vinculando ciencia, diseño, arte y diseño de información, pero tengo distintos punteos acá y quizás pues estoy mezclando un poco las cosas, pero voy a tratar de ser lo más ordenada posible. Eh, entonces, en resumen, ella se dedica básicamente a temas bastante complejos, que son temas de mapping, de cartografía, de levantamiento de data, por medio de herramientas como de plataformas web y distintas herramientas computacionales para traducir la información del espacio físico en información de datos, ¿ya? Me pareció bueno que ella al principio de su presentación trató de definir un poco la disciplina o cómo entiende ella la disciplina, tratando, ¿cierto?, como de empujar un poco las fronteras de lo que un arquitecto puede hacer, ¿cierto? O tratando de empujar un poco los límites de la disciplina como diseñadores, como esta idea de estar cuestionándose el futuro y cuestionándose los escenarios que creamos con esta disciplina, cuestionándose también la incertidumbre de nuestra realidad. Entonces creo que en ese sentido también es muy relevante el trabajo que ella hace de levantar o de levantar información de escenarios reales, de escenarios de conflicto también. Eh, ¿Cierto? Entonces entender un poco la disciplina más allá de la construcción del espacio físico, que es un poco lo mismo también que hablaba Farah. Entonces creo que ahí hay varios puntos en común. A ver, ella contó sobre distintos proyectos. El primer proyecto era un proyecto que desarrolló, son todos proyectos de investigación, pero es un proyecto que desarrolló con Forensic Architecture, que para los que no conocen, esta es una oficina multidisciplinaria, ya no solo arquitectura, tiene distintos, tengo entendido que tiene, ¿cómo se dice? Journalist. Se me fue la palabra.
Periodista,
Periodistas, creo que tienen abogados, arquitectos,
abogado,
diseñadores, etcétera.
diseñadores web,
Eh,
etc.
Diseñadores web, con sede en Londres, que aborda distintos temas de violación de derechos humanos, desde explotación y violencia ambiental, brutalidad policial, lugares de poder en general y sobre cómo esto tiene un impacto, ¿cierto?, en la sociedad y en minorías. Entonces, el primer proyecto era sobre la destrucción ambiental en Gaza, sobre como el levantamiento y mapeo de información satelital de la destrucción de la tierra, la destrucción de la agricultura, de la contaminación ambiental acarreada por el viento, y que es importante, me parece importante cómo utilizan esta información para construir narrativas alternativas a las narrativas de control, ¿cierto? A las narrativas de poder, a través de esta recolección de datos de imágenes satelitales en este caso, para evidenciar estos escenarios de violencia y estos niveles de daño ejercidos en estos territorios. Eh, Describía, ¿cierto?, como el uso de herramientas como fotogrametría, me parece que sería como la traducción, de cómo usar como herramientas de fotografías satelitales en distintas escalas, para entender el espacio tridimensionalmente y para entender y reconstruir la sucesión de los hechos, y para entender también los distintos patrones de destrucción en estos territorios. Después el otro proyecto que mencionaba Lucía era un proyecto más de investigación personal, ¿cierto? Su tesis sobre el clima y el tiempo, específicamente de desastres naturales como los huracanes, y cómo el desarrollo de la tecnología y los modelos de predicción no avanzan a la misma velocidad que los mismos desastres, ¿cierto? Entonces, como ya puede usar quizás estas herramientas computacionales para ir levantando estos datos y predecir, ¿cierto? Usar estas data, información de data para como modelos de predicción. Después el tercer proyecto que ella mencionaba, que era New Calligraphies of Moving Borders, nuevas caligrafías de fronteras en movimiento, que ella mencionaba que esta era su primera vez usando este proyecto, que era claro, más antiguo que los otros que escribía, que la primera vez utilizando herramientas computacionales también como algo experimental en su disciplina, para abordar la estabilidad y la inestabilidad de los procesos sociales y políticos alrededor de la arquitectura, y usar la visualización de data para entender las fronteras en el mundo y la imposición de fuerzas entre ellas, de distintos movimientos alrededor de distintas fronteras que al final dan forma al mundo y a los territorios que habitamos y cómo estas fronteras son impuestas, son construcciones geopolíticas que ignoran cierto, los elementos naturales y ella usaba estas herramientas computacionales para hacer simulaciones de movimientos de río, por ejemplo, y de la relación de estos elementos naturales con la migración, que creo que son temas bastante fascinantes y como que me parece muy difícil de poder resumir en tan poco tiempo. No sé, León, si quieres complementar.
Sí, no, quiero complementar un par de cosas y yo creo que después como podemos hacer la transición hacia las preguntas. Bueno, el resumen de nuevo, o sea, es que tenéis buen talento para la traducción, Fran, como la retención traducción está, pero increíble. Se me va la cabeza
Tomando
cuando
apuntes a toda velocidad.
yo tengo parece que déficit atencional severo. Bueno. Pero lo que sí quería comentar, había un par de cosas que dijo Lucía que me parecieron súper interesantes, entre medio como que entre lo que tú estabas recién contando, que ella hablaba un poco de, cuando dijo una frase en inglés, how can we understand our discipline practice beyond academia and in which mediums or medias? En ese sentido... es interesante porque ambas, creo que ambas, fue explícito Lucía al decirlo, hablan de cómo en el fondo podemos entender la práctica, cómo ella entiende la práctica, o en el fondo cómo se puede entender la disciplina, incluso empujándola o yendo incluso más allá de las posibilidades que entrega la propia academia como espacio, o la disciplina, si se quiere. Y sobre esa misma lógica, ¿cuáles son los mejores medios o los medios adecuados? Eh, entonces es interesante porque después, claro, cuando nos muestra el trabajo de Forensic Architecture, es un trabajo que es mucho más periférico, en el sentido que ya no se sabe o dónde está la línea que separa la arquitectura de otras disciplinas. Entonces es interesante esa mezcla o esas hibridaciones o esas colaboraciones, si se quiere ver donde el concepto de disciplina o esas definiciones un poco quedan obsoletas, porque ya esas colaboraciones empiezan a ser más interesantes. Eso por un lado. Después destaca también el rol del modelo digital como un elemento que permite analizar la realidad o los hechos, incluso el pasado. Entonces la representación, por ejemplo, lo que hace mucho con Forensic Architecture, cuando hacen una representación textual o literal, incluso de los elementos y los objetos, permite entenderlos temporalmente o permite entenderlos y analizar los puntos de vista, que de otra forma sería muy complicado, también solamente trabajando con planos 2D. Entonces la representación 3D en ese caso permite comprender como multifacetadamente esa realidad, y en ese sentido también Lucía contaba algo que me pareció súper interesante como que quede en la reunión, que es estas herramientas al final o estas metodologías permiten entender las posiciones y las realidades de las personas, de las comunidades y las personas. Entonces, es una manera también de entregar voz o de entregar o poder visibilizar esas realidades que de otras formas quedan anuladas por narrativa en general. Entonces se empieza a considerar la acción o lo que se pa- o, la- o, la- o los padecimientos un poco de esos individuos, de esas comunidades o incluso de esos agentes humanos y más que humanos. Por ejemplo, el caso de las hojas como una forma de trazar como una cadena de hechos a través de elementos interrelacionados. Entonces, eso también me parece una cosa bastante interesante de destacar. Y después, también como una especie como de resumen que me llamó la atención, que yo desconocía algunas de las investigaciones, especialmente la última que mostró de Lucía. Hay una intención, o yo por lo menos puedo sacar el limpio, después le voy a hacer la pregunta en inglés también, de una relación de la representación o el análisis crítico que se hace a través de la representación de la información y en este caso la velocidad de los cambios o la velocidad de la velocidad y las transformaciones, que me llamó súper harto la atención, la necesidad de incluso empezar a incurrir en formas no tradicionales de representación o de investigación para poder comprender o incluso visualizar o prever los cambios, los movimientos, las transformaciones, en este caso, por ejemplo, del clima. Entonces, esa de hecho es una pregunta que tenía ganas de hacer, que una de esas tal vez eh, te la voy a dejar al tiro, voy a aprovechar mi plataforma como mi plataforma hegemónica acá para hacer la pregunta al tiro, mientras el resto de las personas puede empezar a realmente pensar o revisar qué quieren, cómo continuar la conversación, qué les gustaría saber, da lo mismo cómo, ni en qué idioma, podemos también ayudar a traducir, pero lo voy a decir ahora en inglés. Lucía, eh, I was just like doing this quick summary of some key points that I understood was very interesting and also complementary to what Francisca was saying, that she went all along with your whole presentation in a very complete way. But my last like a key point that from what you were saying is this idea of this methodology you're utilizing or developing that in a way is this the developing of a research methodology that entangles with the technology and other critical ways of approaching to this information. But for me, is the main goal or the common goal is this to account the movement, the velocity, the transformations in a way in different kind of events. So what was very interesting to realize that maybe it was me, but my question then is how do you or how do you conceive or how is the evolution of your approach or your utilization of technologies to be able to map those transformations? Because it seems that is quite difficult, as you mentioned it, to be able to predict maybe or to visualize what is happening. It seems like we are always a little bit beyond, like uh, uh, far away in a way.
Behind.
Behind, that's the word. Thank you. A little bit behind of these events that you're mapping. So how is the relationship with the velocity or the transformation in a way?
I think that's a good question. So because I feel that since the time of like the last project I presented, which on the timeline was actually the first project that I made, like it changed a lot, this like concept of like simulation that I have in my mind. So like if in the beginning I was testing mostly the software and the ability of the software to like make simulation and like predict in a way as it was happening in the specific project with like software like Grasshopper, where you can simulate through a topography, for instance, different kind of ecological events that happens on the ground because of the water, erosion, and different environmental factors and forces that act on the ground. I think that was like a great tool to start and to begin to understand like how we can simulate the speed of different forces on the ground. And then, of course, it's always kind of like it's part of a simulation. And like if we think about simulation as like something where we intersect external factors that were not completely able to like map and predict, there is also like this like level of uncertainty of what we were map or representing. So I think that like since then, where I was a bit younger, and then it was still like very much a process of discovery for me and understanding also how, as a designer with the tool that we have, I could like continue exploring in that field. I've now completely a bit changed my mind over this topic. Like I've much more interest in like the uncertainty rather than like the ability of this technology to simulate, because of, as I was mentioning, the second project, which is the one I've been developing after, like it started during my stay in New York, so like 3 years ago, and then it's still an ongoing work. It's mostly about the level of which are the level of inability of the technology to simulate the world we live in. So like which are the kind of unpredictability, uncertainties, and all this kind of thing that we think we were able to model because we think we are in control of the tools that we use, but at the same time, there are like some parameters that we can't neither completely understand, and at the same time as we cannot understand them, we cannot also like draw on them. So an example is the one of like the weather, and like how the weather is changing so fast, and how these like models, which are very much related to like some concept that we use in architectural practice, are like not able, not more able to predict, like in this example, like future weather patterns. So I think if I'm answering your question, the idea of like of the mapping the speed and simulate the speed is like it started as more of a speculation. So like let's start with like the data we have and see where we can push a speculation in a way of representation, because I feel that still like a lot of data and like this kind of ecological data that we use to like simulate the weather are still very, very much valuable. But there is always some level of like imperfection, uncertainties related to time, related to scale of this kind of data, that I think is something that very interesting also to question. And to sum up my answer, I think a suggestion for like, for instance, students or like future practitioners that want to start diving a bit more in this practice is always to question critically how they use data, or like how they also want to simulate the environment, how they want to model their own architecture in a way that, like considering multiple perspectives, considering multiple kind of data, consider different scales of through the like as lenses, kind of lenses through that they can like watch the events and topic. So yeah, I think I've answered like moving in far maybe in different topics, but yeah.
Sí, súper, I'm gonna say it in Spanish. Um, Sí, le pregunté a Lucía un poco que yo entendía o yo podía ver que había una correlación entre su metodología de investigación y la velocidad o la transformación de, en este caso, el clima o el medio ambiente. Y Lucía lo que me comentaba, que en efecto, pero más que la representación o la capacidad de dar cuenta de esas certezas que podría entregar el mapeo de esa velocidad o de esos movimientos, era el trabajo sobre lo que no se puede, lo impredecible, sobre lo que ese espacio que es difícil de poder visualizar o poder entender. Entonces, que ese trabajo le permitía también incluso poder entrar a un campo de especulación, donde en este caso el diseño le permite operar y pensar posibles futuros, posibles ideas o incluso experimentar. Eh, y ahí también un poco al final decía que lo interesante o lo importante también es, en ese sentido, es cómo se usa la información que uno analiza. En el fondo, la ética detrás de la investigación. Cómo se utiliza la información, qué es lo que se está considerando y cómo, para qué. Entonces, es bien interesante. Yo quería volver un poco sobre Andrés. Andrés, no sé si estás por ahí.
Sí,
Sí,
Tenías una pregunta.
we don't have a lot of time left, so Andres had a question for
sí.
Farah right at the beginning, so we can go
Yes.
back to that.
Well, I hope you understand when I speak English. I think it's my first time speaking who's people who speak it very well, and I think my question can be answered by both of you. And I would like to know, in your words, which aspects you think of architecture function as a tool for political protest or critique, and why will be a useful tool for doing that?
Yeah, I just see you. Yeah.
If
First, your English is perfect, so don't
Thank
apologize.
you.
Yeah, I thank you for this question. I think it's really important to understand how we're framing architecture here, because um, architecture is not neutral. And as Lucy also began by saying that architecture is not seen as a static thing. And I want to maybe like answer your question like with 3 or 4 different, approaches. One is understanding ways in which the architectural tools can allow for forms of visibility, and allows for ways in which to make visible what is invisible. And you can see, I mean, of course, like very evident in the way that Lucia was talking about the works of forensic architecture. But for me, it's a little bit beyond perhaps the way of just understanding the site itself, or the site of violation itself. Because one, like we have to acknowledge that for example, as during wars, what is at the beginning, what is targeted is infrastructures and architectures, and how architecture becomes weaponized in that way because it disables certain futures to exist. So then, like to my second point, I want to say is that the other ways to understand it is through temporalities and through scales and through space. Because one is temporalities, meaning that, for example, in the work that I try to interrogate, is understanding how certain ecologies are rendered unusable or like unlivable beyond beyond how wars are declared to be over. Right. And this is specifically like, for example, we can begin to see in the way that, for instance, in Puerto Rico, the landscape is rendered like a wildlife refuge and therefore restricting accesses, or rendered a wildlife refuge to allow for certain modes of development to coexist. Right. So that's one point. And the other is through understanding its scalar implications, which is specifically the way in which the architecture that is weaponized is deployed through a planetary scale. Meaning, like for instance, the way that Puerto Rico is a testing site, which enabled wars in Iraq to happen, but these were using very particular material realities. Yeah, that is very much about space, very much about understanding of the way we read the landscape. So I mean, I hope this answers, but also I want to say, like, to your question, like, how is architecture as a tool for protest and politics? One is that we, like, as spatial practitioners, we can operate within other disciplines of activism. that, for instance, it's not about how architects are going to perhaps, I don't know, like solve through the use of technology or through even just through visualization, but it's the way in which architects can be understood as an activist. In the way that, for example, Rob Nixon in Slow Violence describes that, actually writes a lot about the writer as activists. And in that framework, we can turn it to understand in what way the architect can become or operate as an activist. But this is really through let's say like a network of thinking that is beyond just space, right? So this means that it requires the architect to be positioned with other actors or with other experts, because understanding, for example, even interrogating things like the way in which the soil is tested or the air is weaponized requires perhaps different expertise to be on the table. Yeah, so I hope this. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, maybe I can translate it now. Andres, I don't know if you want to comment something else.
No, nothing else. Thank you, Farah.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to translate your answer, Farah. So, a ver, para Farah, como la pregunta está, o sea, perdón, la respuesta a esta pregunta de Andrés de cómo la arquitectura puede ser una herramienta política y una herramienta de activismo, ¿cierto? La respuesta de Farah es que la arquitectura no es neutra y no es estática, y es algo que también Lucía mencionó en su presentación. Creo que es algo que las dos tienen como un punto en común, ¿cierto? De esa definición de la arquitectura como una manera de activismo, ¿cierto? Quizás en Farah, o sea, pero sí, Farah lo mencionó al principio como, mencionó el dibujo como una herramienta de activismo en su presentación, y luego Lucía mencionó también, ¿cierto? El mapping, como el levantamiento de datos y el mapeo como una forma de activismo. Y un poco la respuesta, para volver a la respuesta ahora que estaba dando Farah, creo que es importante lo que ella decía, entender la manera en que las herramientas de arquitectura pueden dar visibilidad y para construir narrativas que no son visibles, eh, más allá de entender solamente los territorios, ¿cierto? Para como visibilizar cómo la arquitectura se usa muchas veces como un arma de guerra, como cierto, cuando empieza una guerra eh, lo primero que se ataca, ¿cierto? Son las infraestructuras de las ciudades, ¿cierto? Entonces, también es importante entender el poder que tiene como la disciplina en ese sentido, y también entender las distintas temporalidades y cómo distintas específicas, perdón, ecologías se vuelven inhabitables, incluso más allá después de cuando terminan estas guerras, ¿cierto? Que estos territorios terminan siendo totalmente destruidos y entonces, claro, como que al final la temporalidad de la guerra va mucho más allá del inicio y del fin que determinan los agentes de poder, ¿cierto? Involucrados. Y para esto sirve también un poco la arquitectura y unas herramientas como para entender las implicancias y la escala de la manera en que se usa estas herramientas de poder como armas de destrucción. Y mencionar al final que también es distinto, o sea, también es importante mencionar que podemos operar, que es importante operar con otras disciplinas de activismo, que como arquitectos también necesitamos como un poco complementarnos de otra información y otras herramientas, con otras redes de conocimientos que van más allá de lo espacial, ¿cierto? Y como un poco adquirir esos otros conocimientos de otras expertices como para poder utilizar también nuestras herramientas de manera como más fuerte también. No sé si habrá alguna otra pregunta, creo que ya estamos un poco en el tiempo. I don't know if we have any more questions. We are like a bit late, I think, but maybe we can maybe we have time to one last question.
Alguien la puede hacer en castellano y lo podemos traducir nosotros también.
Hola, sí, tal vez yo podría como dar el último agradecimiento. En lo que estaban conversando y todo eso, I think I think that many times we tend to stick with the physical or material as we can touch and perceive as immediately. Like the only thing that we can be architecture, and it's inspired to discover other ways of looking at architecture. Again, from a more human, delicate perspective. So I think it's very inspiring to listen to both of presentation. And thank you, Farah, Lucia, for all the work that you have done. I think it's very meaningful for many right now, and I'm sure it will be contribute a lot to the way we practice our discipline. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Francis. Thanks for this intervention. It's very nice words. I appreciate your comment, and yeah, I'm sure you guys can now shape your own practice I guess during this, if I understood correctly, during this series of seminar and conversation, you have the possibility to talk to different practitioners, and yeah, and then I'm really available also in the future if anyone wants to reach out to ask more specific questions. If now it's a moment, I understand every time there's lecture or something, there's a moment of shyness in the end, where no one really wants to ask anything. But if in the future, next week, next month, next year, you're gonna have a question, if you want to send up an email, and I'm happy to answer, have a meeting, have a chat, whatever. And thank you again for the invitation. It's a very interesting conversation, meeting both Francisca and Farah for this first time, and then seeing Leon again for a webcam, everyone, but thank you.
No, thank you too very much. I mean, I think it was very interesting to have you both at the same time, because I don't know if you've worked together before, but I think you have so much in common. And I don't know, I think it's very inspiring and very powerful how you see or how you define architecture as a way to account for these situations of control and to make visible narratives that are not very visible. So I think that's very powerful. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to add some thank yous as well. I'm really impressed. I knew both of you separately, and I really love it, the work you're doing, in a way, understanding that is a bit different, but sharing very a lot of things, I believe. So I think it's really important for right now to understand, at least, or to see in this concept of these students that are kind of understanding where to go, that learning possibilities and way of practice, and where they're going to be specializing in the next month, years, after graduation. So it's interesting to show them other ways that maybe here in Chile or in undergrad is not well developed so far. But I believe this approach, your work, could maybe visualize more different possibilities, and maybe somebody would like to pursue something like that, something like this, or use some of the ideas and keep developing, and and keep evolving. So thank you again very much for your participation, your generosity. Yeah, well, Lucia is I think it's very late in the UK. Farah, it's not that late. It's less late, but it's okay. So thank you both a lot. Yeah, and I hope to meet you again. Well, Farah, we're gonna see you in a couple of months. Lucia, hopefully as well. But yeah, uh, so, no sé si alguien quiere decir algo o hoy damos espacio para cerrar. Básicamente lo que estaba haciendo era agradecerles por el trabajo que estaban haciendo y por las posibilidades disciplinares un poco que muestran y que proponen para ustedes, para que las empiecen a revisar, para que tengan también en cuenta, a la par de otras ideas, puede que alguno le llame la atención o, o tal vez desconocía estas posibilidades y las entienda como una forma válida o algo que les gustaría empezar a explorar. Entonces, es interesante también las posibilidades o las aperturas disciplinares que empiezan a aparecer, incluso cómo se trabaja con la información o qué cosas pueden o no pueden ser arquitectura, que también es una pregunta que se habla bastante. Creo que esto empuja un poco el límite de qué es la arquitectura, una pregunta que yo creo que está bastante obsoleta y un poco que no sirve para nada. Entonces, es interesante también empezar, o sea, consumir también o entender estas dinámicas y cuál es nuestro rol frente a dinámicas que tal vez son un poco más grandes o un poco más ajenas, incluso. Así que no sé si alguien quiere decir algo, si no, le doy el pie también bueno, a Lucía o para despedirse. Well, I think nobody's going to say anything else, but I was just like translating pretty much what I said. So yeah, thank you very much again, Farah, Lucia. Hope to see you soon, both, and stay well and keep doing a lot of cool things.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hope to see you soon. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Thank you.